Hi and welcome to today's live chapter reading of Luke by A.S. Roberts, courtesy of Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue. Luke, 34 years ago. Father Mackenzie had been asleep for possibly 2.5 to 3 hours when the phone downstairs in the hallway started to ring out its shrill and incessantly annoying tone. The phone's volume was always at the absolute maximum to ensure any cry for help could be heard all through the clergy house. The sound of it made reverberated through the silent house. The noise was one he'd heard too many times to count since arriving at St. Columba Roman Catholic Church in New York City only 9 years previously, from the much quieter city of Dublin in Ireland. He could have sworn on many occasions that it was enough to wake the dead, if of course he swore. Coming to with a start, he realised the noise would soon be rousing everyone else from their slumber too, and he needed to make a move to answer it. It might be the 21st century, but he knew that even with all the do-gooders and charitable organisations available, there would always be the haves and the have-nots in this world. It was his mission to console and to help the latter. He let out a sigh of acceptance that circumstances were unlikely to change in his lifetime, and that perhaps they were worse now than at any other point in history. Muttering a quick prayer, he roused himself to move his frame off the warm and comfortable mattress beneath him. Operating on automatic pilot, he opened his eyes, swung back the covers as he always did, and jumped out of bed, propelling himself towards the dark-stained wooden door. Then he pulled it open quickly and winced as the cry for help hit his ears again. He stopped only once to retrieve his bathrobe from the chair beside the door. Then, thrusting his arms into it, he hurried out of his bedroom. The several inches of snow on the ground around the clergy house had turned the world white. Thankfully, this reflected through the bare stained glasses and lit his path. He shivered as the cool air hit him, and his stomach turned over in apprehension of what he might have to deal with in the small hours of the morning. As he made his way down the large staircase, Father Mackenzie silently prayed for the strength and needed to help the poor soul on the other side of the line. Although the sound of the phone was always the same to the untrained ear, he had realised a long time ago that he was very often aware of what the person on the other end needed before they had even spoken. And this person, who could feel in his heart, was desperate and possibly at breaking point. Without a shadow of a doubt, he recognised that the ring he could hear in the early hours of Christmas morning was the pain-filled cry of help from yet another frantic and weary soul. Luckily, Father Mackenzie was still young enough to run down the stairs 2 at a time. He stretched out his arm as he rushed towards the old black phone, desperate to offer words of comfort as the receiver renewed its attempts to vibrate itself off the cradle. Finally, he grabbed it in his large hand. St. Columba Clergy House, Father Mackenzie speaking. The shaky sound of someone trying to draw breath came through to him. It's okay, we're here to help. Tell me how I can help you. He tried again, making sure his voice was encouraging in its tone. An emotion-filled sob reached his ears and his heart broke a little bit more, the same as it always did when he absorbed the pain of another. Please tell me how we can help you, my child, he gently pleaded into the phone. Father Mackenzie gripped the receiver even tighter in his hand. It was his only connection with the troubled soul on the other end, and he willed them to feel the strength of the love he was trying to send them. He willed them to carry on, to not put the phone down, and to connect with him in some way so that he could help them. My baby, the young woman on the other end whispered to him, in between the sobs that were now racking through her body. Please. Your baby, he questioned, making it loud enough so that with a raise of his eyebrows and a nod of his head, the clergy housekeeper Francis, and one of the younger priests who had also answered the loud cries of the antique phone, automatically sprung into a routine that was far too well practiced for his liking. How can we help your baby, my child? Steps, she whispered back to him. With an overpronounced wave of his arm, he sent the 2 people who were looking expectantly at him for information, outside their warm house to the church next door, where he knew in his heart they would find what she was gifting to them. Within minutes, Francis and Father Hayward appeared back at the open front door. Francis held a small, tightly wrapped up bundle in her arms. Father Haywood disappeared back outside and into the snow to look around for anyone else watching nearby, as they all knew that the baby's mother was bound to be close, making sure her child was taken inside. "It's okay, my child. Help is on his way," he spoke back to the desperate woman on the other end of the line. "Thank you," the young voice whispered back to him. "I can help you too. Please stay and talk to me. We can come and get you wherever you are." Francis removed the dirty-looking blankets from the baby and silently showed him the obviously newborn child. He could sense that the girl on the other end of the line was getting ready to leave. "Your son is beautiful. You've done such a good job, my child. We can help you look after him. Please tell us how to find you." Father Haywood appeared back at the front door, sadly shaking his head after not finding what he was looking for. "I can't see her anywhere nearby. Any footprints in the snow have disappeared," he whispered, as he shivered in his nightclothes. The normal call and diversion tactic, he carried on, making sure his voice was no more than a whisper and couldn't be heard by the caller. Just then the baby boy scrunched up his fists and let out a strong wail of indignation. Father Mackenzie knew that whilst he might have been newly born and left out in the snow by his mother, he was strong and apparently very hungry. The young woman's voice found a certain strength after hearing her baby boy's cry, and it spurred her on to speak. "Tell him I love him. Tell him I'll always love him. It's just better this way." A click sounded in his ear. With tears pricking the backs of his eyes and a loud sigh of resignation, Father Mackenzie replaced the receiver and held out his arms for the newborn child. He held him tightly to his body and willed his warmth into the tiny infant. "Father Haywood, please dial 911. He looked down at the boys in his arms. "Welcome." Then he looked back up at Frances. "Now where did we get to, Frances?" he sighed. "Let me see, Father." She stopped talking momentarily and used her fingers to work out the answer to what he'd asked. "Matthew, Mark. That's right. We got to Luke." Using his forefinger, he gently drew the sign of a cross on the baby's forehead. "Welcome to the world, Luke Mackenzie." Chapter 1. Luke, 2.5 years ago. "So what do you think?" I suppressed the urge to laugh out loud at Ralph's accent. It was fucking weird how, although we'd only been in the UK for a couple of days, he was already sounding like the Brit he was by birth. When no one answered immediately, Ralph pulled away from the group to move in between us and the huge red brick building in front of us. He opened his arms out wide and turned around on the spot, looking strangely like that woman from The Sound of Music. "Just look at it," he spoke again. His enthusiasm was obvious, and a wild smile took over his face. Somewhere inside, I knew I was happy for him. He was home, for the first time in 15 years or thereabouts, and it was exactly where he needed to be. But where the fuck do I belong? The same haunting question I'd been asking myself since I was a small child reared its unwelcome voice inside my head. It had been silenced while Charisse had been in my life, because the two of us had belonged together. But now she was gone, it had returned with a vengeance that I couldn't or didn't want to extinguish. I no longer had the answers to anything. Questions flooded my head constantly, until I guiltily craved the same oblivion Charisse had found nearly 3 months before, when she'd taken the ultimate way out. At the same time, she'd shown me that my love for her and for our daughter, and the family we'd always craved, wasn't strong enough, or just simply enough, for her to choose to stay with us. She never confided in me why. I wasn't even sure what I thought or felt anymore. Her death had made me question if what I had thought I understood about love and life was way off the fucking agenda. So I took a few minutes and hoped Brodie and Cade would answer him instead of me. I wish I'd died instead of her. I squeezed my eyes together tightly, trying to rid myself of everything flying around inside my head. The pain I constantly felt was temporarily swiped away by guilt. As for what might have been the millionth time in the 82 days since she'd be gone, I wished myself dead and her daughter alone. What sort of fucking dad are you? Shut up! I felt myself screw my eyes tightly shut as I tried to extinguish the broken man I was inside. As the pain and questions began to ebb away, I nervously opened my eyes again to face the bright sunshine of the day. And this was the way grief seemed to go for me. Round and fucking round I went with it, until I was almost too exhausted to function. But however exhausted and emotionally wrung I was, it was nothing compared to the doubts in my mind about who I really was. Am I a good enough dad? I certainly hadn't been a good enough husband. But the one thing I was now was clean, and for now I hoped it was enough. I sighed out loud, trying to release the pent-up pain from my body and into the open air. My body shuddered with the exertion and catching myself as I disturbed the sleeping form of my young daughter. I stopped breathing briefly until I was sure I could exhale without waking her. Needing to feel her strength, I pushed my forefinger into Brielle's pudgy hands, the same one she always put in my chest as she fell asleep, in the only place she would now sleep, without whimpering her loneliness, and I felt her fingers instinctively take a firm grip onto it and me. Fuck. Yet again, the feeling of panic at being her sole parent rushed through me, followed by the calmness that she brought with her. She was so very young, but so damn fucking knowing at the same time. Her hold on me, her love for me, was 90% of the reason I was still here, living and breathing. The other 10% was down to the men around me, my brothers in every sense of the word, except name. Life, I discovered, was never to be taken for granted. All those worries that I'd had about the future when I was a kid growing up in the church orphanage seemed completely redundant. As I'd found out, tomorrow wasn't a given for anybody. The plans that Charisse and me had made together years before, lying on the roof of our shared duplex back in Vegas, had been ripped into shreds the moment I'd found her, collapsed on our bathroom floor, with a syringe still hanging from her vein. And love. I'd only ever experienced any kind of love with Charisse. But the night she'd made the decision that she couldn't cope with life anymore and had driven that loaded syringe into her arm, choosing death over the three of us being together, would be forever seared into my brain. That one night had taught me that even love was a selfish fucker. I knew I'd love her in my own way for the rest of my life. But what about the cold, hard hatred I had for my once vibrant but now dead wife? The one that I hadn't admitted to anyone but myself. Would that also stay with me until I took my last breath? The same had to be asked of the gut-wrenching pain that had ripped out my insides and shattered my heart into a billion tiny fucking pieces. Because if so, I wasn't sure I was strong enough to survive them. Up until 3 months ago, I'd always been the loudest, most in-your-face of the four of us, the one who was willing to try anything and everything life had to offer, with a passion that the other three in DD seemed to sometimes struggle to keep up with. But now she was gone and I was empty, void of passion and feeling, and it appeared even life itself. I was a stupid fucker who, with his own need for the next adventure, had introduced us all to the smack that had consequently given me the comeuppance I knew I deserved, and ultimately my moronic choices had taken my wife. I'm not saying the fuckers wouldn't have found it on their own anyway, but it was a decision I knew I'd always have to live with. I closed my eyes, dipped my head forward and buried my face into the sleeping form of my little girl Brielle. And I breathed her in while I listened to her gentle snores and the banter around me. It's fucking immense, beautiful even, and everything you ever described it as, Brodie put in. After he stopped speaking, I heard him inhale a deep lungful of the fresh air around us, as if to prove the point he was trying to make. You're talking about it like it's a woman, dude. I knew without looking up that Cade would have rested his arms around Brodie's shoulders while he teased him. Raph, can it definitely be done in the timescale and budget we want? Questioned Cade, who was forever our numbers man. I've shown you all the plans, Raph replied. Yeah, I know, but I don't understand the English you and they speak. It's a different fucking language, Cade started laughing. Fuck. Fuck off. Cade's voice sounded out in surprise and warning. I imagined by the reaction and the change in direction of his voice that Raph had sent him sprawling to the ground next to me. They've assured me it can, Raph answered with an amused tone. That's good enough for me, Brodie muttered under his breath next to me, apparently now lost in thought. Then he cleared his throat and carried on. We agreed about needing the new focus, about putting down some roots, and here is a good place as any I've seen. There's just under 100 acres of land around the place, so it can be a flagship hotel. And at the same time, we can build ourselves homes here deep in the English countryside, Ralph carried on. If we want to, of course. Fresh air and shit, Cade added. And away from the media, he groaned. I heard them all starting to mutually agree that this was exactly what they felt that we all needed.